Everything is meaningless. What a way to start the week, right? Everything is meaningless. I've been reading today through Ecclesiastes. And the thing that's interesting to me is that's how Solomon begins and ends this book chocked full of wisdom. Ecclesiastes chapter 1, verse 1. The words of the teacher, son of David, king in Israel. Verse 2. Meaningless, meaningless, says the teacher. Utterly meaningless. Everything is meaningless. And then he goes on talking for chapter after chapter after chapter. And once we get to the end of the book of Ecclesiastes, once we get to Ecclesiastes chapter 12, verse 8, the last words of Solomon. Sure, there's a couple of verses at the end that is somebody summarizing what it is, kind of an addendum on Solomon's work. But the last words of Solomon in verse 8, meaningless, meaningless, says the teacher. Everything is meaningless. Now, it's easy in a time and in a society that is finally having its eyes opened, and rightfully so, to mental anxiety, to mental trauma, to mental disease. It's easy to look back on this document, some 2,000-3,000 years old, and to diagnose Solomon with some level of depression. But I don't think that's, not only do I don't think that's fair, I actually think it's missing the wisdom of what he is saying. Meaningless. Meaningless. Everything is meaningless. It's interesting because Solomon then, whenever he makes this announcement at the beginning, he then starts marching through, almost like a life review. He starts looking at all the different things that he did to try to satisfy this stirring for meaning. So, Ecclesiastes chapter 1, verse 17, what Solomon's probably best known for, wisdom. He says, then I applied myself to the understanding of wisdom, and also of madness and folly. But I learned that this too is a chasing after the wind. That even chasing after wisdom is meaningless. So then he goes on to chapter 2, verse 1. I said to myself, come now, I will test you with pleasure to find out what is good. What is the you there? I will test you. I think it's meaning. I will test if meaning is found in pleasure, to find out what is good. But that also proved to be meaningless, without meaning. Verse 2, laughter, I said, is madness. And what does pleasure accomplish? I tried cheering myself with wine and embracing folly, my mind still guiding me with wisdom. That's interesting. That there's actually a desire to be guided by wisdom that can lead you to things like vices. He says, my mind still guided me with wisdom. I wanted to see what was good for people to do under the heavens during the few days of their lives. The problem is, whenever he looked for pleasure, whenever he even turned towards folly, it still produced meaningless. It still produced meaninglessness. Meaning was not found there either. He says, verse 4, I undertook great projects once again on his pursuit of meaning. He turned to working, not the laziness of drowning our sorrows and vices, but he actually turns to working, which is another way of drowning our sorrows through productivity. He says, I undertook great projects. I built houses for myself and planted vineyards. I made gardens and parks and planted all kinds of fruit trees in them. I made reservoirs to water groves of flourishing trees. I bought male and female slaves and had other slaves who were born in my house. I also owned more herds and flocks than anyone in Jerusalem before me. I amassed silver and gold for myself, so it's turned from work to wealth. And the treasure of kings and provinces. I acquired male and female singers and a harem as well. The delights of a man's heart, now sex. I became greater by far than anyone in Jerusalem before me. In all this, my wisdom stayed with me. I denied myself nothing my eyes desired. I refused my heart no pleasure. My heart took delight in all my labor, and this was the reward for all my toil. Yet when I surveyed all that my hands had done, and what I had toiled to achieve, everything was meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Nothing was gained under the sun. Here's my point in bringing this to you this week. As I was reading Ecclesiastes, my thought was, I know what that feels like. I know what it feels like to be searching for meaning with such desperation that you pursue one accomplishment after another, thinking, hoping that whenever you climb that mountain, that from the summit you will be able to see what your heart is searching for, and that is meaning. The problem is, no matter how many things I've accomplished, from getting a doctorate to publishing a couple of books to being invited on stages to having a family of 4 to having money accrued to fill in the blank, everything proved to be meaningless. But I think it's important for us to define the word meaning so that we know what meaningless actually means, so that we know what it is that we do not have. I think what Solomon is describing in Ecclesiastes, and I think what I was looking for, was not meaning in the sense of purpose, but meaning in the sense of that one thing that quenches the insatiable thirst of my soul. That one thing that satisfies the longing and the movement in my soul. And the reality is this: there is nothing outside of us that has been created by us or for us that can satisfy the stirring in our souls. For it was not made to do that. It does not have the capability to accomplish that. Therefore, it doesn't matter what job position that you have. It doesn't matter how much money you have in your bank account. It doesn't matter how many friends you have or how many things that you think you have accomplished more than others. It will not satisfy that stirring. It will not quench that thirst. For what Solomon was chasing, and for what each of us have been chasing since Eden, is wisdom. Capital W. That's why I think 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 18 really should go hand in hand with Ecclesiastes. For God describes Christ as the wisdom of God. So we've not been searching for a thing. We've been searching for a person that can satisfy our soul. So here's my challenge for you this week. Do what Solomon did. Take a life review. Not looking for just the positives, but also look for the negatives. Not looking for just wisdom, but also looking for folly. But come to this point where you can smile and say, none of that was there to satisfy my soul, which actually gives you freedom, number one, to unite with God, but number two, to explore everything under the sun through being guided by the person of God Himself in Christ, who I call wisdom. Love you guys. Have a good week.